Thank you, Steve.
We'll give you some history
Of our chapter. Is it acting up?
Our chapter was organized. Turn it off. Turn it back on. Works with computers. Testing.
Hello?
There we go.
Okay, our chapter was organized on March 24th, 1898.
Go ahead, I'm gonna sit it on the floor.
By Leslie D. Witherspoon. The chapter originated with 14 members who lived in Yorkville. The city name was changed to York in 1915. To give you a brief history of our chapter, we must go back to 1870, 100 years after the Battle of Kings Mountain. As you probably remember, the battle was fought on October the 7th, 1780, and we take pride in the fact that history has recorded this battle as a turning point of the Revolutionary War. I know some historians say it was the Battle of Cowpens, and I don't mind letting the Cowpens chapter take credit when they celebrate their anniversary or their battle celebration in January, but today we take full credit. In 1880, the Kings Mountain Centennial Association, composed of men from York and Kings Mountain, was formed for the primary purpose of buying the battlefield ridge for their centennial celebration. They paid $197.50 for 39.5 acres. Almost at the same time in Washington, D.C., 4 ladies formed a National Society of Daughters of the American Revolution to promote God, home, and country. The date was 1890. Their vision was to provide volunteer service to assist our country in time of war and peace. The Kings Mountain chapter was organized 8 years later in 1898. 1 year later, in 1899, letters were written to the surviving members of the Kings Mountain Centennial Association, and they agreed to relinquish 39.5 acres of land in favor of the Kings Mountain chapter. The chapter claimed the name of Kings Mountain by birthright, and have taken the name felt responsible for the care of the battleground. It was owned by the Kings Mountain chapter for 30 years, and in 1931, the land was donated to the U.S. government and was referred to as the DAR tract. Sometime later, the U.S. government designated the park as Kings Mountain National Military State Park. The Kings Mountain DAR chapter worked with the representatives of South Carolina and North Carolina who introduced a bill in Congress providing for an appropriation for the battleground. They succeeded in getting the United States government to appropriate $30,000 for the erection of a monument to commemorate the great victory won there on October the 7th, 1780 by the American forces, commanded by Colonel William Campbell, John Sevier, and many others. There is a picture of this beautiful monument on the front of the chapter booklet you received today. South face of the monument reads, "On this field, the Patriot forces attacked and totally defeated an equal force of Tories and troops loyal to the British. The British commander, Major Patrick Ferguson, was killed and his entire force captured. This brilliant victory marked the turning point of the American Revolution." Our chapter has much to be proud of today as we celebrate our 120-year history. Still in our possession are the original minutes and journals since 1902, our historical records, which include many newspaper clippings, letters, and other documents. Most importantly, we have our original charter, signed in October 1898. I hope everyone's had an opportunity to view the charter, and you'll see the number 423, which represents the Kings Mountain chapter, 423rd chapter accepted into the National Society of the Daughters of the American Revolution. We also have 19 historical monuments and marker sites, which we maintain by checking the condition of the monuments and markers from time to time. Well, I could go on and on about our history, but we don't have time. You can all come back to see us, and we'll take a trip to Kings Mountain Battleground and see the monuments that mark our chapter's history. This time, I would like to introduce Bob Inman. Bob is a novelist, playwright, and screenwriter, and is a native of Elba, Alabama, and a graduate of the University of Alabama. He is the author of 5 novels. Bob has written screenplays for 6 television motion pictures, two of which have been Hallmark Hall of Fame presentations. His script for The Summer of Ben Tyler, a Hallmark production, won the Writers Guild of America Award as the Best Original Television Screenplay of 1997. His other Hallmark feature was Home Fires Burning, a 1989 adaptation of his novel. Inman has penned 8 stage plays, including 2 musicals, Crossroads, The Christmas Bus, Dairy Queen Days, Welcome to Medford, A High Country Christmas, The Christmas Bus, the musical, and the drama club. His most recent play is Liberty Mountain, a drama about the Revolutionary War battle at Kings Mountain, which premiered in October 2014 in Kings Mountain, North Carolina. Bob and his wife Paulette live in Conover and Boone, North Carolina.
Thank you so much for that lovely invitation. It is a real honor for me to be here to help you celebrate this anniversary today. I was saying to Libby that this is one of the most significant DAR chapters anywhere. I really believe that, and she agreed with me. Because of who you are and where you are and what you have done. And to be a part of your celebration today means a very great deal. Good to be with a fellow Alabamian. Steve was, when I was working in television in Montgomery, Steve was probably in elementary school. But I always had a lot of contact with and a great deal of admiration for the Department of Archives and History and the then director Milo Howard. Now I think I remember, overheard Steve telling the mayor something about Auburn. You're an Auburn graduate. Well, I'm an Alabama graduate, but my father played football for Auburn. And when Auburn is playing anybody but Alabama, I am a big Auburn fan. My Alabama fan relatives in Alabama think I'm a turncoat, a heretic, and all that, but that's all right. I love Auburn. I was thinking today as I was driving down here from Conover about how much I enjoy visiting York and places like York, because the place where I grew up in Alabama, the place that formed me as the person I am, is a little town called Elba down below Montgomery, and I know Steve is familiar with it because they win state championships in high school football and do a lot of other good things too. Elba is a town of about 4,000 people, and it was about 4,000 when I was growing up there in the 1950s. It seemed like that if anybody new moved in, somebody either had to move out or die. They wanted this 4,000, and it was a wonderful place for a boy to grow up. One of the reasons is that you could see and feel people very close all the time. There were very few secrets in Alabama, in Elba, Alabama. And if you were growing up there and you had enough sense to keep your eyes and ears open and your mouth shut, you could learn a lot about human nature. And I've certainly used that in writing novels and creating characters. In Elba, you name any oddball in the world, and we had one of each, at least one, in Elba. And the thing about our oddballs is we put them out on the front porch, and if you were walking by on the sidewalk, you could stop and visit. We didn't hide them inside. We were proud of our oddballs, and I've used a good number of them in my novels too. It seemed to me that growing up that Elba was, and looking back on it as in the days since I left, that towns like York and Elba are a microcosm of America, where people live close by, elbow to elbow, and who share values. Elba grew up out of the land. York grew up out of the land. This was frontier forest back in 1780 when our ancestors were fighting at the Battle of Kings Mountain. And the town grew up and gathered people around it and provided services to people, and a courthouse where you could go and record marriage licenses and land transfers and things like that. it seemed to me that a place, any small town, is where people learn to accommodate. I heard somebody say one time that you can't stay mad at a fella if you have to look him in the eye every day. Well, now I know some folks in Elba probably been at least aggravated with each other for a long time, but I think in essence that's true. In a small town, you may be mad at a guy, but you have to sit next to him in church and at the high school football game, and you learn to accommodate. And that's what we do in America. That's part of our basic value, is that we learn to accommodate each other. America's not a done deal. It's a place that's changing all the time, and we can see the changes all around us. But we manage somehow to accommodate the changes and move on into the future. We do that because we're all in this together. We don't need bloody revolution or coups to overthrow our government. We vote. And that's the essence of accommodation in America, is that we vote and we have a peaceful process. I'm so impressed with I was reading back this morning on Wikipedia the history of the DAR. And I learned that my organization, the SAR, was formed first. And women applied for membership, and the men said no. So by golly, you formed your own organization, and you've outdone the men, us men, by a long shot. With 180,000 members and 3,000 chapters, the SAR would love to have that kind of history and existence today. There's some things in your mission statement that I think are part of the core of America. One is preservation. And Ed talked about the battlefield at Kings Mountain. I don't think that battlefield would exist were it not for this chapter. It was, from the Goforth family. It was bought by those folks back in Yorkville not too long after the battle. But it was just there. It was just that sacred ridge where your ancestors and my ancestor, Colonel James Williams from South Carolina, fought, and some died, including Colonel Williams. But you had enough presence of mind to get hold of that land and preserve it so that it could be passed on to the National Park Service, and we have the wonderful, marvelous, exciting, stimulating national military park that we have today. It's one of my favorite places to go. I had heard about Colonel Williams in my family lore growing up in Alabama, so when my family and I moved to Charlotte from Montgomery in 1970, one of the first places I took the family was to the Kings Mountain National Military Park. It used to be sort of a sick joke around our house. Oh, it's Sunday. It must be time for Dad to lead us over to Kings Mountain and walk the nature trail. And we did that a lot. But I found the place over there where Colonel Williams and his men attacked uphill. It was a very steep part of the terrain where they attacked. And I think probably pretty close to the place where he was shot and died the next day. And I've often thought, this really is sacred ground. And if you go over there and you stand on that ground and you keep your eyes and ears open and your mouth shut, you can feel the spirit of those people who won there and won our independence and gave birth to the DAR and the SAR and other patriotic organizations. So you're so essential to the preservation of our American heritage, legacy, past, and I salute you for that. The second is education. We've got the Good Citizenship Awards and the essay contest, and your constant interest in passing this along to young people. Steve's exactly right. Our young folks don't know enough about where we came from and how we got here. In Kings Mountain, where we put on our play every summer, our director went to the middle school and took a show of hands in a large group of kids And it was amazing and disturbing how many of them did not know how the town of Kings Mountain got its name. They didn't know about the battle. Some of them thought it was part of the Civil War. And they didn't know the heritage there and why that is so important. They didn't know why Thomas Jefferson said it was the battle that turned the tide and set America on the road to independence. So you're doing what you can. And I know that you promote this in your local schools and in schools all over the state to let young people know this is important. We don't know where we're going unless we know who we are, and we don't know who we are unless we know our past. I've always been a big fan of history. I was a history minor in college, and a lot of my work has historical background in it. I really believe in using. Everybody has a backstory. America has a backstory. And if you know the backstory, then you can write intelligently about the present day. So you're promoting education through the things you do and the influence that you have in your community. And I think that's a marvelous thing to do. And the third is patriotism. One of the things I think that you do and that we all do in terms of patriotism is participate. I hate to see a home with an American flag flying out front when I know that the people have never registered to vote. And if they have registered, they don't go to the polls. To me, that's sort of phony patriotism. That's flying the flag, but that's not participating. I used to take part every summer in a program at UNC Charlotte where teachers would come and we'd talk about the various things about democracy. And my favorite phrase to them was, democracy is not for sissies. It's something that has to be participated in. And I know that you do that. I know none of you would dare not vote. And I know that you promote it among your friends and neighbors and your family. And another thing is the principle of honest dissent. It would not have happened at Kings Mountain did people not dissent. Now, the American colonies had tried peacefully for a long time to get the attention of king and parliament. And their first notion was, okay, we're a colony, let's make it a better colony, and let's be treated as if we're valued. Well, it seemed that the British, all they wanted to do was keep a thumb on the colonies and get economic benefit out of it, place to trade. So they tried. They would send delegations to Parliament. They would petition the king for redress of their grievances, and it kept falling on deaf ears. There is a scene in Liberty Mountain where Patrick Henry says, we've tried that, and that lot in London acts as if they are deaf and we are dumb. And so it came to the Continental Congress, we're going to have to do more than just dissent. But the basis of it was their dissent. And so they formed a Continental Army, and they hired General Washington to lead it. And throughout the colonies, militias formed, and many times did the work of dissent in a violent way, because they had decided that that was the only way they could get the job done. At Kings Mountain, they dissented violently, and if they had not, there wouldn't be a DAR or an SAR, and there wouldn't, I don't believe, we might still be singing God Save the Queen. And I love the Queen, but I don't want to sing to her. So we value dissent in America. We were born of dissent, of people who were not satisfied with the status quo and meant to do something about it. Especially those men and women who gathered to fight at Kings Mountain. Many of them, especially our group here through upstate South Carolina, where Colonel Williams, my ancestor, came from, they had been involved in some skirmishes, but nothing nothing like Kings Mountain. those over mountain folks over there across the Blue Ridge in what is now Tennessee. They were fighting the Indians and they had their hands full, and they were willing to just let the war go on in these other places. But when they were threatened, when their lives, their homes, their families, their places of worship were threatened, they organized and they marched across the mountains and they hooked up with these folks from South Carolina and other parts of North Carolina and surrounded that mountain and gave birth to American independence. So I salute you for what you do here. I salute you for who you are, for your work in preservation and education and patriotism. We all owe a very great debt to you for keeping the spirit alive and keeping it moving. And I appreciate the opportunity today to share with you my thoughts about what you do and who we are. We are planning our 6th summer of productions at Liberty Mountain and Kings Mountain. We've had 5 very successful summer productions. Our crowds continue to grow. The word's getting out. We've had more and more people from outside this immediate area. Busloads from Columbus and Spartanburg and places like that, and Raleigh and Greensboro. And so the word's getting out. And that's one way we can all together promote the idea of keeping the American spirit alive. So come see our play and sometime invite me back here. Thank you very much.